Thousands of renewal projects are underway in Taiwan as cities grapple with aging buildings, earthquake safety concerns, and old neighborhoods that no longer meet modern standards. At the same time, housing has become one of the nation's defining political and economic issues, with prices in many areas pushing beyond the reach of ordinary residents. I'm Divya Gopalan, and on Connected on TaiwanPlus, we'll be looking at why Taiwan is rebuilding itself now and why a river peninsula in Taipei has become the battleground over what urban renewal should look like. Liao Kuei-Hsien is a professor at the National Taipei University and an expert in flood risk management and sustainable urban development. Thank you so much for coming into the studios.
Thank you for inviting me, Divya.
Really looking forward to having this conversation with you. We want to start with a bigger picture look of what urban development in Taiwan looks like.
Yes, let me just provide a little background for that. I think nowadays Taiwan is a highly urbanized nation. Most of the people are living in the urban area while our rural area are losing populations. And this general trend of urbanization had occurred in the past decades. So I think that because Taiwan was going from a developing country to a developed nation, nowadays we're quite wealthy. But I think that there has been a mindset that the rural area has to turn into an urban area in order to have progress. So I think in the past decades, a lot of the rural areas are hoping to turn into high-rises buildings. So there constantly have been development projects, and these development projects has turned rural villages into industrial parks or urban districts. So I would say if we are looking at development or redevelopment area, we can say that there are two types of redevelopment projects. The first type being turning rural villages or farmland into urban districts. The other type is turning the older urban districts that they were already urban to begin with, to turn them into newer urban districts. So nowadays, a lot of the redevelopment project, I would say, take the approach of what in Taiwan we call integrated development. And by integrated, it really means starting from anew. In plain language, it means demolishing everything on the area, in the area, on the land, and start everything anew. And that's the major way of how Taiwanese government do redevelopment project nowadays, and also in the past.
The idea of tearing apart
exactly,
communities,
yes,
and the fabric of society.
Exactly. For projects like Shezidao, it's actually a redevelopment of the entire urban district. We actually don't call it urban renewal. People just call it developing. So as if, well, a lot of people call Shezidao as the last virgin land in Taipei City, which is not true at all because Shezidao was already developed. There were a lot of historic settlements there. So I think the more accurate way to describe it is redevelopment. But this kind of redevelopment in Taiwan nowadays still is exactly the same like the Western experience, like the urban renewal experience, where basically the government go in and clean up everything and building everything new.
I do want to talk about Shezidao a little bit more in detail as we carry on this conversation. But before that, I want to understand, because when we talk about urban renewal here and redevelopment here, and as you said, both in the rural areas and the urban areas, what you're seeing is the old buildings being torn down, which often are low density, and in its place, high density, high rises, tall buildings come into that space. Who is occupying these spaces? How are they filling them up?
That is a very good question. Before I can answer that question, I should give a sort of background of how the government redeveloped a rural area or an old urban area. There is this unique policy tool or development tool called zonal expropriation. It is a land resumption, but it's a land resumption of a very large tract of land, very large area. So how it works is that the government identified an area for redevelopment basically for urban development. And the government would take all of the land from the landowners. And the landowner, there could be thousands of landowners. And in Shezidao, it involved more than 5,000 households. And that's not even the biggest zonal expropriation projects. So basically, when the government did that, when the government wanted to develop an area, basically, the government need to provide public infrastructure. So the government develop public infrastructure, and the government will also return some land back to the original landowner, but only about 40 to 50%. That means the original landowner would have to donate, in a way, 60% of the land to the government for the government to do public infrastructure. Now, there is the remaining land for the government. There will be remaining land after the land for compensation for the original landowner and the public infrastructure. The remaining land will be sold to the private developers for revenues for the government. And that's how the government finances the entire development. The problem is, if you are a large landholder, you can benefit from this zonal expropriation, because after development, your land, even if it's only 40% of your original land, it will increase in price, increase in a significant way. So the landowner could benefit a lot from it. But if you are a small holder, you don't have a lot of land to begin with, and then you only get 40% after that. And that 40% could be so small for a buildable building. And so eventually you will have to sell it to the developer. And once you sell your land to the developer, you have to go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to understand this idea. Okay, so quite a complex structure there. Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down so in such a digestible way. I also want to understand I understand that Taiwan does not have a housing supply issue, but an affordability issue. How much of this redevelopment, and I'm realizing this myself as I look for houses to rent, older buildings give you more space for cheaper rent and more affordable. The brand new buildings, tiny little spaces and incredible high prices. Yes. How much is that adding to the affordability crisis that we're seeing in Taiwan? And is there a housing problem here?
Yeah, let's use Taipei as an example, because Taipei is a very aging city with a lot of old people. A reason being, younger people cannot afford to live in Taipei. Even myself, I'm not young anymore, but I still cannot afford to live in Taipei. It's very, very expensive. This is not because there are not enough housing stock. There is a huge housing stock, but majority of this housing stock are older buildings. For example, 70% of the housing stock are composed of houses that are over 30 years old. And if I can remember this correctly, more than 50% of the housing stock are buildings that are more than 40 years old. They are very old buildings. The problem is not that they are old, because they don't have elevators. So imagine older people living on 5th floor. That older person may not want to go in and out of their building quite often, because he or she will have to climb up stairs.
The stairs,
Yeah. So the problem being, if you're a young family, and you wouldn't want to buy those old buildings because you don't know the condition of these old buildings, and you also don't know if those buildings will be subject to urban renewal,
yes.
Right? So that's why people wanted to buy newer buildings, but the newer buildings are really short in supplies. So there is a short supply, but it's not about building in general, but in newer buildings. And the problem is the new buildings are really, really expensive. Younger people cannot afford them. And that's why younger people are driven out of the city. They move in New Taipei City, they move to Taoyuan City.
And now we get to Shezidao. Can you explain the situation there for our international audience who are not familiar with that area?
Right. Shezidao is basically is a very low-lying area at the confluence of Jilong River and Danshui River, the two major rivers in Taipei Basin. And because it's so low-lying, in the very beginning, in its history, it was relatively lower developed. And when Taipei starting to become a capital busy city, and Shezidao was still an agricultural area. And I have to go back to this flood control history of Taipei. Shezidao's destiny was highly tied to Taipei's flood control plan. In the 1970s, when Taipei was growing and it required some flood protection infrastructure, and the government decided to protect Taipei, Greater Taipei, with a 200-year flood protection standard. But that plan excluded Shezidao. The reason being Shezidao was agricultural and it was deemed low in economic output, therefore not worthwhile to be protected in a way. And because of that, Shezidao received a development ban. That means because it was not protected, which makes sense because it was not protected, there shouldn't be development. So we don't put people and property in harm's way. But somehow, this also linked to the mindset I was talking about. Rural people from rural area wanted their home to become urbanized. So people in Shezidao, over the years, they also feel and also think that they wanted to be urbanized, especially over the years. They look at the Sanchong, they look at Luzhou, these urban districts in New Taipei City that continue to be developed. They see high rises. They see the rest of Taipei become developed, urbanized, become prosperous. They also want their homes to be like that. But the problem is if the government putting flood control protection at the same protection standard as the rest of Taipei, it might jeopardize the flood carrying capacity of the other levees. So this has become a controversy that the people wanted Shezidao to be developed, but the central government was afraid that protecting Shezidao might impact the flood protection capacity of the rest of Taipei. So because Shezidao was defined as a flood zone, that means when there was a big flood, Shezidao should be flooded in order for the rest of the Taipei to be not flooded.
Yet mayor after mayor have presented development plans for Shezidao. But it's always remained a point of friction or an issue. So what is the solution for somewhere like Shezidao where people do actually want a higher standard of living? And at the same time, they want to maintain their community. Can this be used as an example for other parts of Taiwan if they manage to create an environment that satisfies both?
Yes, I think it is important to address Shezidao's current plight to satisfy both, to maintain their community identity, existing community identity, and also increase the living standard. Unfortunately, the current development plan proposed by Taipei city government ignored the first. Basically, they are doing the urban redevelopment. They are approaching Shezidao exactly the same as they used to do in the past. They consider Shezidao as a clean canvas. So basically demolished everything. In the plan, all the historic settlements will be demolished as if they didn't exist. So, and also using the development tool, what I just introduced, the zonal expropriation, that will leave almost 70% of the existing residents not being able to stay in Shezidao. That means after development, according to the government's plan, if the government's plan materialized, then most of the people who will be living in Shezidao will be a different group of people.
Thank you so much, Professor Liao Kuei-Hsien. Great to get your insight on the program.
Thank you.
As Professor Liao mentioned, there is much pushback against the redevelopment of Taipei's Shezidao Peninsula. The 9 villages have been frozen in time for over half a century, where endless development plans are stirring constant friction, but remain in political gridlock. We talked to residents and organizers and followed them as they performed a local ritual for what could be one of the last times.
Each year, during the Lantern Festival, residents carry the Earth God through streets filled with smoke, noise and crowds. While much of Taipei has transformed into a dense modern metropolis, Shezidao has followed a different path. Shaped by the water of 2 rivers and more than 5 decades of development restrictions. Photographer renewal first came to Shezidao 8 years ago through the Earth God Festival.
因为弄土工活动来到这里，然后才发现这个地方跟我小时候的居长环境蛮雷同的，所以很讶异，说整个台北市里面居然还有这种世外桃源。
The Earth God ritual in Shezidao is believed to date back more than a century. During the processions, devotees carry the Earth God palanquin through the neighborhood, while local businesses prepare firecrackers to welcome the day. The thicker the smoke, the stronger the blessing is believed to be, a prayer for a prosperous business and good fortune in the year ahead. But much of the ritual's early history was never fully documented. Flooding over the decades damaged many records and photographs, while Shezidao itself gradually became cut off from Taipei urban development.
当我进来这里，发现弄土地公这一个活动是想要申请无形文化资产，可是碍于没有所谓的文献，因为社子岛这个地方经过了太多的变化，然后这边所以我在想要怎么样可以帮他们可以努力去申请到。
Back in 1970s or even earlier, it was kind of excluded from urban development because of their sort of hydrological situation, what we call the flood-prone area. And all the future development or buildings activities were suspended ever since.
In 1970, after the catastrophic flooding of 1963, the government imposed strict building restrictions, effectively freezing much of Shezidao development for decades. Over time, the islands evolved in a manner that was less planned but more organic than many other parts of Taipei. Professor Ka Min-jae from National Taiwan University has spent more than 2 decades studying Taiwan's cultural landscapes. He argues that Shezidao distinctive communities and land patterns should be reflected in any redevelopment plan.
It was a very special area that urban planning is missing. Local authority is not as evident as the other part of the city. Sometimes you could even feel certain autonomy in this very special place.
Yet, preserving what makes Shezidao unique is only one part of the conversation. The island's future also raises broader questions about development, infrastructure, and flood management.
社子岛之所以重要，有几件事情啦。第一个，它是整个200年的防洪的计划中间的一部分。另外，它其实因为从过去这个有洪灾以来，到现在已经超过50年是禁限建，也就是说，当地的不管是环境其实没有那么好，就是基础的公共设施缺乏，那建筑管理其实也没有，然后土地的持分其实这些年下来越来越零碎。也就是说，要具体改变这个整个这个社子岛的开发，必须要有一个整体的思维进到这个社子岛里面。
我们坚持要解除禁建、原地改建。
The lack of development and the prospect of development have both caused frictions for residents in Shezidao. There are those who value their way of life, but also want the same freedom as homeowner, like in the rest of the country, to improve their living standards.
说要整个案子要停下来，这个社子岛各位记者来过都知道，这个环境超级差的，工厂一大把，荒地一大把。
让我们可以解除禁建，让我们居民可以原地改建、就地合法，这样我们的所有的聚落才有办法留下来，那我们的文化也才有办法得以保留。
While there are those who feel that redevelopment is inevitable and will be the best way to raise living conditions in the area.
类似像自救会的这些大姐们，她们很明确的知道，在开发以后的那个新的都市样貌，其实会跟现在他们日常所需的状态差很多，所以他们是很反对这个开发案的。然后，但是也会有另一部分的人是他知道这个开发案会带来怎么样的一个都市愿景，然后他们愿意承担某些风险，然后去接受这样子的开发案。还会有很大的一部分的人，他们可能是他们一直都知道有开发案这件事情，可是他们是不是真的了解现在生态社岛实际上会发生什么事？其实我觉得并不多。
Nested between the Chilong and Tamsui River, more than 10,000 people still live on Shezidao today. Over the decades, the island has repeatedly become the site of competing development visions, each proposing a different future for the people who live there.
社岛这个地方很独特，就是因为它留下了某一种整个台北盆地在发展过程的一个片段。
Nearly every Taipei mayor has proposed a different future for Shezidao.
那现在的城市开发很多其实是要完全把这个片段给移除掉。
For many who oppose the redevelopment, the threat is not just the loss of their homes, but the unraveling of a social fabric built over generations.
因为其实在这里有一句话，台语叫做“嫁不出征”，就是嫁不出这个社子岛。也就是说，我们大部分除了就是紧密的邻里关系，还有姻亲的关系。
我们前面也有菜啊。谢谢季啊。来。
One of the most controversial aspects of Shezidao redevelopment plan is the use of zone expropriation, a land readjustment mechanism that would reshape property ownership and the layout of existing settlements.
In this mode of expropriation, the government didn't actually spend any money to purchase private land. They negotiated with local sort of landowners to give back 40% of your original land holding, and they could auction the other 60%. According to this mechanism, the original community or social fabric of settlements will easily disintegrate because you would draw the lot of your future land holding, and then you might be dispersed to other area of this new plan.
一个开发计划重要的是城市其实要有文化才会有灵魂，所以社子岛不是完全的推土机的铲平以后再做开发，不是。沿弄土地公的实质的文化的，那或者是街道的脉络是有趣的，原来的系统是有趣的，它可能是跟他的家族的活动或者是民俗的活动有关的。我们都希望在聚落里面能够有进一步的思考。
The residents' concern is shaped in part by what happened nearby.
我们就看到跟我们相似的北四科洲美，他们被禁限建，他们的历史跟我们一模一样。
Zhoumei, now part of the Peito Shilin Technology Park, has already gone through zone expropriation. For Li, it offers a glimpse of what Shezidao could lose.
那整个征收之后，1/3的人他不符合政府的承租条件、承购条件。所谓承租跟承购，就是政府会盖安置宅卖我们，或者租我们。那1/3的人他买不起安置宅，他只好跟政府租，所以他本来有房子，他变成租房子。那房子被拆迁，庙宇被拆迁，人离开原来的聚落的话，你这个所有的文化都是没有办法照常举行。就像 中美它已经被拆了，这个弄头底宫它要怎么样照着它过去按照居民居住的大街小巷来弄头底宫，没有办法，它不可能围绕着这个电梯大楼来绕一圈，那还是要坐电梯来弄头底宫，都是没有办法。
在我的看法里面啊，开发没有不好，只是说你要用如何的条件跟环境去做这件事情的计划，我觉得那个才是重点。
On the day of the Earth God procession, teams from different settlements moved through the firecrackers in shorts and bamboo hats, clothing that recalls Shezidao farming roots. They carried the deity from home to home, from shop to shop, praying for prosperity and good fortune.
This is the final Connected on TaiwanPlus. 3 years ago, we began with a simple but ambitious idea to bring Taiwan into a wider conversation, not only as a leader in technology, but at the center of issues that matter globally, be it business, education, housing, and the social questions that sit beneath them. What it became was something far more than a program. It became a team effort in the truest sense, with our talented producers shaping stories, videographers finding meaning in every frame, studio operators keeping everything moving behind the scenes, and countless others whose work the audience never sees but always feels. To our guests, the thinkers, the leaders, the experts, the voices who joined us from across Taiwan and around the world, thank you. Each perspective challenged us, taught us, and widened our lens. And as we dimmed the lights for the last time, we'd like to thank our viewers for making space for these stories, for engaging with them, and for being part of this journey with us. It has been a privilege to connect with you. We hope the conversation doesn't end here.